All right, good morning from Washington, D.C. I'm so pleased to welcome you for the launch of the International Forum's new report, Deepening the Response to Authoritarian Information Operations in Latin America. By way of introduction, the International Forum for Democratic Studies at the National Endowment for Democracy works to accelerate learning around critical global challenges to democracy and the ways that civil society is responding and retaking the initiative. I'm Adam Fivenson. I lead the forum's work on the information space and democracy, and I'm so excited to introduce what looks to be a really fascinating conversation about authoritarian information manipulation and democracy. So I'd like to start by thanking our moderator, the esteemed journalist and author Moisés Naím, for being with us today. And in just a few minutes, I'll turn it over to Moisés to lead the discussion. But first, a few words about what we know and what we don't to set the stage. We know that in Latin America, Russia, China, Iran, and other global authoritarian powers are actively working to undermine democracy. And we know that these efforts have increased significantly since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, as recent reports by USIP and the Brookings Institution have documented. We know that regional powers like Venezuela and Cuba are collaborating closely with these global powers, amplifying messaging, providing technical assistance and funding in support of an entrenched authoritarian messaging ecosystem that facilitates this sort of messaging in the information space. We also know that there's a growing constellation of civil society organizations, journalists, fact checkers, researchers, and others around the region who are working to secure the integrity of the information ecosystem. What we don't know, and what drove us to research this topic and write the report, was a desire to better assess and understand the impact of this increasing authoritarian collaboration between global powers and regional powers, as well as local actors in the information space, as well as why the support of global actors, global players and powers matters in a region like Latin America, where democratic backsliding has been advancing rapidly in recent years. Further, we wanted to understand how civil society around the region sees the challenge to democracy in their information space, and look at how they're responding to date to consider how that response might adapt to retake the initiative for democracy in the information space. So in just a moment, I'll turn to our panelists, who will have much more to say on these questions. But first, just a few words about our conversation today. I'll open things up just now with a single question for each of our panelists to get us in the mindset of the report. Then I'll pass the word over to our moderator, Moisés Naím, for a deeper conversation about the topic, about authoritarian information manipulation in Latin America, how it's evolving, and what we might do about it. So we're tremendously excited to have three fantastic panelists with us today to kick off our conversation. The first is Iria Puyosa. She's a senior researcher at the Technology and Democracy Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. Iria is one of the report's authors. Our second panelist is Mariví Marín Vázquez, the founder and executive director of ProBox Observatory. Maria is the report's other author. We're also joined by Fabiola Córdova, who is the Deputy Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the National Endowment for Democracy. So let me just start with a single, very brief question for each of you, and then we'll launch into the broader conversation. So Iria, starting with you, drawing on your essay in the report, why is it, in your assessment, that global authoritarian actors are targeting Latin American democracies?
Well, going to your question, we have been seeing authoritarian collaboration in Latin America for the past 20 years. We observe some trends were coming together over the years in weakening democracy and fostering new authoritarianism in the region. Part of that is a global network of autocratization. So part of that goes beyond Latin America and is affecting the United Nations systems, the human rights system. So it's fostering authoritarianism, and more and more countries help to current authoritarians to strengthen their power and strengthen their position and shield themselves against sanctions for human rights violations, what they call interference from other countries. So that is one of the reasons why this is happening. Other reasons have to do with geopolitical competition. for countries like Russia, particularly more so than China, Latin America is seen as a strategic region because of the is close to United States. So they see it as a region who will having power in Latin America for extra hemispheric powers had a strategic importance in the global competition for them, particularly for Russia. It cannot balance the equation. They see Latin America should be as important for the United States as Eastern Europe is for Russia, Asia Pacific is for China. Unfortunately, I don't think that is true. I don't see United States seeing Latin America as important for their strategic interests, but for Russia it is. So part of the investment they have been doing in Latin America, in building these relations in Latin America over the years, particularly the alliance they had with Venezuela, in minor degree with Nicaragua and Cuba, is responding to that competition. So we had these two things working together, those drivers. So once getting together all the authoritarians, sharing strategies to a war is more friendly to autocracies and less friendly to democracies, as is something they share. And the other side of the equation is challenging U.S. in what they consider should be their strategic geopolitical area of influence.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that brief assessment. I know we'll get more into the nature of the problem, but as you described, bolstering their power, supporting their friends, and using the region essentially as a strategic underbelly to attack the U.S. and our position, and frankly to attack democracy, right? As one step further. Let me turn to Mariví. So thinking about your essay, how would you describe the efforts of regional authoritarians such as Venezuela to target regional democracies through the information space?
Thank you, Adam, for the introduction. I'm deeply honored to be in here in this space with people that has inspired my work so much. The first word that I will use to describe these efforts, I think it will be uncountable. I truly believe that there is a well thought and very malicious game plan from the foreign authoritarians such as Putin and Xi Jinping that has been, as Iria mentioned, for years, coordinated and implemented locally by their regional peers like Maduro, Ortega, Díaz-Canel, and more recently, other authoritarians in the region, such as Bukele. But this coordinated and implemented game plan is not only to gloat every time any democracy in the world faces darkest moments, but also these strategies has been designed to maybe to act in different ways on the information ecosystem. For example, this operation has been sophisticated and very well coordinated. This has been increasingly reliant on technology and especially social media, and this has been aimed to undermine democratic institutions, leadership, and even eroding the public trust in democracy. That I believe this is a phenomenon that has caused a lot of the backsliding in the region, and that for now we are still understanding the dimension and the consequences of these operations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mariví. I know you have quite a lot of personal experience dealing with this issue. And I should also acknowledge that it's not by accident that we have 3 Venezuelans on the call today to highlight growing authoritarian influence, rising authoritarian influence in the region. So thank you for your commentary and thank you for your work on this tremendously important issue. Let me turn to Fabiola. Based on your work at NED in the Latin America region, how do you see civil society around the region responding to authoritarian information manipulation?
Thank you, Adam. I would say that, civil society in the region is responding in both traditional and exploring new ways. And I think that Mariví did an excellent job in her essay describing some of the traditional ways in which civil society has been responding to disinformation campaigns, and that's what we have been doing as well for a long time at NET, supporting high quality journalism, fact checking, media literacy, and all of those things. But these are kind of longer term investments that may not necessarily address the particular issue at hand. So we're also supporting and exploring kind of new ways to address this challenge. I would just briefly say that there is no formula that Latin America has yet discovered or any other region has discovered on how to address this global issue, right? So part of what we can do and what civil society can do is just like experiment and explore different alternatives to see what is most effective, and then try to analyze why was it effective? Was it context specific, or was it something that can be shared more widely? And there, I think there are a few initiatives that are worth highlighting, and we can maybe go into them a little further, but is trying to understand how these autocratic narratives move across the region in a region that shares a language. And that is maybe slightly different from some of the other regions. So things kind of can really move across the hemisphere in a quick way. So that also allows organizations to maybe not only react, but preemptively think about how to respond to something that might be coming their way. So the pre-bunking, I think, which is what Mariví had also described in her essay. So I'll stop here, but hopefully we can discuss more.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you raising this question of proactivity. And how is it that those of us trying to get good information to people, especially around elections, just as one example, can find ways to do that more effectively? And I think you're absolutely right about this question of how do we essentially better and more quickly understand types of authoritarian narratives that are entering our information space, then also design responses. And it's one of the reasons why, at least on the forum side, we've been focused on coalitions and the work that coalitions are doing together to detect, analyze, and then respond to these types of authoritarian narratives that harm democracy. So really appreciate your thoughts on that, Fabiola. We'll definitely circle back to it. I just want to note that the report itself is now live on the NED website. If you go to ned.org/ideas, you'll find it there. And I believe we're going to paste the link into the chat right now. So at least you can open that, but don't read it until we finish, please. And with that, let me turn over to our esteemed moderator, to Moisés Naím, who will lead us into our broader panel discussion. Thank you. Moisés, please. I think you're muted. Moisés, I think you're muted. There we go.
Apologies. So first of all, thank you, Adam, for inviting me to join this panel. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you for the great job you've done with this report. This is a subject that is perplexing in terms of how important it is and how limited it is, the understanding and the efforts to operate and to try to counter all the initiatives that are taking place around Latin America. And as was said, soon we're going to have another report, I hope, extending the analysis to the rest of the world and have a comparative perspective that it will be well grounded in what you already started. So congratulations for that. I will try to be very limited in my interventions and will just distribute questions amongst the three of the excellent panelists we have. But underlying the conversation, and one that interests me, is what I have called the great asymmetry. And that is the asymmetry between what authoritarian regimes can and actually do in utilizing all kinds of new technologies, new ways of practicing geostrategic assaults and that kind of thing. You know, there is an asymmetry between what authoritarians can and are doing and those that democracies can do. If the United States, for example, decides to emulate some of the practices of the most extreme practices that we have seen practiced by authoritarians, it will be a political scandal. The big, I want to repeat it, the big asymmetry is how much can authoritarian regimes do without any control, without checks and balances, and how limited are the efforts of the democracies around the world that are helped on that. So that's one point. The other point is that there is a lack of examples. There's a lot of theory. There's a lot of grandiose statements that commonly appear in conversations. But we lack examples. We have one of the reasons why this report is so great is it has examples. It's rooted and grounded in examples of actual things that are happening, which is not common in this conversation. So those are two of the underlying thinking that I think we should develop in the conversation, because the three of you have worked very closely in trying to close the gap, and then have been bewildered by how large is the gap and how much more needs to be done, and how alarming is the situation, but how little there is actually happening in terms of countering it. No, so let me start with Iria. Iria, the big question, the the globalization of these kinds of activities. What can we learn from Latin America that other regions that are also under assault by authoritarians can do to counter the efforts?
Thank you, Moisés. You begin the panel for the solutions, what is great, but we will need to unpack a series of things. As you mentioned, part of the work we did here in this report, and it's kind of the work we do in the DFRLab, the work ProBox do, the work Cazadores de Fake News does, is trying to analyze specific operations, looking at what are the agents, what are the narratives, how they coordinate, how they deploy. In some cases, try to approximate what is maybe the impact. That is always a challenge. So is it one of the things we do? But in that war, as you mentioned, this is some asymmetries. Actually, I wrote a book chapter a couple of years ago. I used the word asymmetrical war as a title because of what you say. So these authoritarian actors, these government-sponsored disinformation efforts, had a lot of resources, financial resources, human resources, technological resources, and they had no guardrails in terms of what is legal and what is illegal, what is ethical, what is unethical. So that made the war of countering more difficult for democratic actors within countries and internationally, because we had ethical standards, we had legal limits of what we can do. So we can engage as a democratic actors in manipulation of the information, in disinformation operations, influence operations, interference operations in other countries. But we can do this kind of work. So analyzing the trends, understanding how they deploy, exposing how that happened, sharing that knowledge with the wider community, teaching the public opinion how to recognize that and how to act against that, and sharing the knowledge of what the new tactics are emerging. We know every tactic appeared in Venezuela in 2010, appeared in Nigeria in 2012, appeared in Ukraine in 2011, appeared in Iran in 2009. So they sometimes it's coordination, sometimes it's learning from what they see others doing, but the democratic actors don't do that learning. So we are not paying attention to what is happening in other countries, and we see these issues as domestic issues. That is happening in this particular country. Brexit happening to England. So everyone see the issue as their own domestic issue. And one thing for me is really, really important is to start thinking about this as a global trend, and authoritarian actors globally coordinating operations to undermine democracies around the world and to undermine the human rights standard systems. And we need to act cooperated. We need to get together as democratic actors in countering that. And that is, for me, is the most important challenge. How we get together politically to understand this is a challenge to everybody, it's globally, and we need to work together, finding the way to work on that. More comments later.
Thank you. Yes, you raised a set of issues that are very important. We are the essence of the conversation, so we'll get back to you again to elaborate on some of the points. I have known and followed the work of ProBox and Mariví Marín for years now, and always admiring and surprised of how much she does with so little. So this is a great opportunity also to celebrate that. Let me start by asking you, what has been the biggest surprise you have had in managing this project and in understanding the scope and nature of the activities and the actors? What surprised you the most?
Thank you again, Moisés, for such a lovely comment. I think some of the things that has raised awareness in our team and in local partners is how deep the roots of authoritarianism in the informational space in Latin America has been growth, because this has been well documented in authoritarian countries such as Venezuela, because the operation is deeper and is very much implemented from Venezuela to other countries. But this doesn't mean that it only affects the authoritarian countries, because many of these operations are designed to undermine other democracies in the region, other leaderships. I think Iria has made an amazing job with the highlighting the examples, new examples, not even all examples, because we have a database that is very old, but she did an amazing job to find new ways that the authoritarian has been undermining leaderships, democratic institutions. And also you can see almost in every narrative that is polarization, that is trying to divide, undermine the trust, not only in democracy, but in the institutions, and how valuable the protections of human rights are, is mostly pushed or amplified by these authoritarians all over the region to, again, to divide the people, to use, most of the time, to use the pain against the people, because it connects with the emotions. And sometimes the work we do is very scientific, and it's hard to reach different audiences. And this is something that we are still trying to solve, because we know the authoritarian has used this a lot. They are reaching new audiences and young people with strategies that has been very well designed and very well deployed. And I think we are still have a lot of work to do, but we cannot be, for example, a specialist in everything. We need, as Iria mentioned, and Fabiola did too, we need everyone's efforts to push back these strategies that has been going on for years, and that now we have seen many of the consequences. We are not just trying to understand the operation, but the consequences of operations in the digital ecosystem that has been affecting the real life of people, of elections, of democratic process. So I believe there is, we have been doing a lot. There is a lot more to get this battle a little bit more, basically balanced to the democratic war against the authoritarians.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And we'll get back to some of the points you raised. Fabiola, you sit at the center of a lot of the studies about this. You know, the NED has done for years now an extraordinary job in highlighting the challenges, pointing to directions for change, for intervention, and so on. Give us a couple of examples of successful intervention that managed to counter one of these bad initiatives. You know, pick one or two to illustrate the kind of work that people are doing, because it's very diverse, both geographically and even functionally.
Mhm.
So in the wealth of information that you manage and you see, what are two examples that are worth highlighting that are interesting?
Yeah, thank you, Moisés. And, you know, I have also been so impressed by the work that ProBox has been doing. So I'm going to use that one as one of the short examples I want to highlight. But I think that something that is interesting to bring to the conversation is the time that this has been happening, right? For a long time, I think we all kind of assume that some of these campaigns were organic, or like we had limited understanding of how things were happening. And I think for me, at least, ProBox was the first organization, I don't know how many years ago now, 7 or more, that brought to the table the conversation of this is inorganic content and we need to document it and we need to show how and why it's inorganic. And although right now that feels like a very it doesn't feel like a novel idea, at the time it was. So I think that, you know, understanding these challenges in the context of their evolution is also important. So I wanted to highlight one of those, you know, in terms of understanding the effect of inorganic content in spreading false narratives and autocratic narratives. And I think not only in the autocratic countries, which is the other part that I think is very important that we've been starting to discuss. Because, you know, we could maybe for a moment say, well, Venezuela is a lost case, so whatever, right? But what is happening is that these narratives are being exported across the region and are actually, you know, taking root in a lot of these other places. And in part because democracies have been having a difficult time. We are in a very difficult time for democracies at the moment. So these narratives are arriving at a time when citizens across the hemisphere are dissatisfied with democracy. They see a lot of failings in the ability of democracies to deliver on good governance, on, you know, goods and services. So it becomes much easier for these narratives to really take root, not only in the autocratic countries, but in the democracies. And so this, I think, brings me to the second example, which is was also mentioned in Mariví's essay, which is the Latam Chequea network, which is a network of fact checkers from across the region. And although we can all discuss the limitations of fact checking, I think something that is really interesting about this network in particular is the ability of different fact checkers to coordinate with one another and discuss kind of what's coming. What are some of the narratives that are taking root in this country that may be moving across the region to other countries? And how can that information help these organizations that want to protect the information space and defend democratic values and free expression? How can we use that information that is already spreading in other places of the region to pre-bunk some of these disinformation campaigns, and also not to be always reactive, but maybe to the degree possible, and this is very challenging, preempt some of this. So I think those two examples are slightly different, but very avant-garde. They were in their time and they continue to be. And I think that's kind of one other challenge. And I think when we think about asymmetry, is not only in terms of resources that, you know, autocratic governments can dedicate to this, the number of people who are involved in both propagating disinformation versus those that are trying to fight disinformation manipulation, but it's also the question of time, right? Like it takes sometimes time to address the challenge. And how can we, you know, try to be more efficient at this?
Which again brings us to the nature. This was very interesting, Fabiola, because you brought it to the center of a conversation about what to do about it and the nature of intervention. Let's talk about the United States. A big player. They are aware in the, you know, in the national security organizations. They know that these things is happening. I don't know that they know how deeply ingrained this is. According, you know, listening to you and from what I know is going on, there is what I mentioned as a big gap between how much is happening and how much is not understood. And so what I will give you, each of you, an opportunity to talk a little bit about the role of the United States in this process. Iria, why don't you start? Be brief, because just rapid fire kind of which examples that you will have in mind.
As I mentioned in the introduction, part of the reason why China and Russia are so interested in Latin America is because they see Latin America as a space for direct competition with the United States. As I mentioned, I don't see United States thinking the same. So I don't see United States seeing Latin America as an strategic region. I see United States more concerned about what happened in the Middle East, what happened in Eastern Europe, rather than what happened in Latin America. So I think the region has been overlooked by United States for about 20 years for different reasons. Some of them may be sounded, some of them I think is just lack of knowledge of the region. And I hope this is changing now. But initiatives like this report and a couple of others have been coming out recently. Tell me there is a beginning to get an interest in the regions, in the region, and in what is happening in the information space in Latin America, what is happening with Latin American democracies, the erosion of democracy in the region, the consolidation of authoritarianism. That is starting to be an issue here, but it's just in the beginnings. And there's no much action at the moment and I'm aware of, but I expect that to change as more information came out, as more recent, like what we do is coming out, and policymakers start to understand the situation better. I think that will be changed, and we will have a more even playing field for fighting for democracy in Latin America.
Mariví, in your case, do talk about the United States, but there is a question from the audience that says, what evidence there is of Russia's influence, along with Cuba and Venezuela, in interfering in democratic processes and elections in countries such as Colombia and others in the region. So talk about the United States, and then also mention or tell us, what do you know about the evidence that shows that Russia is actively engaged in the region? And do that very quickly.
Yes, I will. I have to say that at the same time that authoritarians and dictatorships has been coordinated and developing capacities, the response from the more established democracies and the more institutionalized countries sometimes look weak, isolated, and most of the time reactive. But I have to say that many, for not to say all, of the operations that we have seen from the authoritarian aligns with the Chinese and Russian interests around influencing local conflicts and expanding the anti-Western and anti-imperialist narratives in local digital ecosystems, which are, of course, primarily against the US, the Western and democratic values. So here, for the authoritarians, the enemy is not democracy, it's the democratic values. And with that, of course, the US is the biggest target for them to go against. So I have to say also that Russia and the Chinese Communist Party has provided Latin American regimes with tools and knowledge to keep certain leaders in power at all costs, while attacking those who doesn't align with their viewpoints. In return, the authoritarians spread global disinformation, propaganda through their network, languages. They are very smart in adapting the languages. What is happening in the authoritarian countries of Latin America is more similar of what we have seen, for example, in Africa, than the operations we have seen in the democratic countries in Latin America. So this has been shared between the authoritarians, not only in Latin America, but globally. And this exchange includes spreading, I said, spreading propaganda and disinformation through not only social media, but also to state-controlled media outlets and social media platforms, supporting the pro-authoritarian groups and politicians. Of course, this goes again any democratic leadership and institution in the region. We have seen also how they use spywares and cyber attacks to steal sensitive information, as well as employing the troll armies to harass and intimidate journalists. The thing is that in social media, every content that you can see that goes viral can actually affect the perception of people regarding that topic. The thing is that if you are not aware how this information can be manipulated, you are very unaware of that, and you can be victim of disinformation.
Thank you. Very interesting. Fabiola, same question to you. Then Iria has a question also, but Fabiola, the same question. The United States and the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the United States, is also supporting some of the response, right, through efforts like the NET and others. So I think that there's always more that can be done, but I would not discount what's already being done. So that, I would say, just kind of one important point there. And maybe I'll cede my time to Iria, who may have more specific issues on the global context to contribute.
Sure. Thank you. Iria, please.
I just wanted to point some of the examples of interference in information operations, interfering in elections in the region. One of the case studies we had in the report is the recent Ecuadorian elections. We had data there about how Russia was interfering in the elections of deploying information operations related with the election, particularly with the information related with the assassination of presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio. That is a very recent example we were able to document for this report. But historically, we had other examples of authoritarian actors in the region meddling with other countries' election, as Venezuela interference on Bolivian elections in 2006, Ecuador elections in 2007, Argentina elections in 2007, who actually lead to a judicial process in Argentina. So more recently, Ecuador 2021, in which Venezuela was also involved. I remember ProBox documented some of those coordinated operations from Venezuela government affecting Ecuador, or even more recently, the case of Venezuela supporting a presidential candidate on Honduras. So we have a long history.
It's amazing how widespread it is.
Yeah, in the particular cases, Russia, as I mentioned, we saw this situation now in Ecuador, but I also seen some signals in Mexico. Still, next year we probably will be seeing more on that. We will see more activity from Cuba, who also is very involved in Mexico and been involved in other Latin American countries for decades. So these foreign influence operations are so common in the region. They are not always successful, so there is not the only factor deciding elections. So citizens are agencies, but it's always a factor in the most recent electoral process in the region. It's something you should account for when you plan for an election in Latin America.
Thank you. One of the dimensions of the big asymmetry, and is one of the paradoxes or perplexities, is how technology created in the United States is used by the enemies of democracy and the United States. A lot of the technologies we have been, and you correct me, you know about the details, but a lot of the techniques and technologies and products and software that are being used by the bad actors, call them, are American made. Is that the case? Am I correct in that interpretation? And if so, what to do? Any one of the three of you would like to jump in? Mariví.
Yes, something that we couldn't put on the essay because it was too much information was the use of artificial intelligence to spread propaganda, to manipulate the public opinion, and elections even. While democratic countries has been used artificial intelligence for the well-being of its citizens, for developing maybe in healthcare, or even to help to do regular tasks for the people, the authoritarian has been using the artificial intelligence for bad. They are creating fake videos to confuse people, to spread propaganda. And this is a deeper, I have to say, a deeper challenge, because artificial intelligence is such an advanced tool to use against people that even doesn't have internet. For example, Cuba spends most of the time without even electricity. So this is asymmetry, I believe, it's very dangerous. While the authoritarian have all of the resources and advanced resources, we are lacking of having even access to internet, to connect to VPNs, to even have access to internet that has been understood as a privilege in many of our countries, not as a right. So we have to do the work of media literacy, as well as we are doing the efforts to counter all of these operations.
Thank you very much. There is a question from the audience that says, that asks if specific topics and narratives that are not aligned with democratic values resonate with communities or not. What happens with the stories that we are being told, and that now with artificial intelligence, as Mariví has pointed out, we have a tsunami of narratives and stories. And again, the bad actors seem to be very good at developing stories that undermine democracies and amplify their influence. So talk a little bit about narratives and counter narratives and narratives that are hidden in themselves inside the narratives. There are all kinds of tricks.
One of the case studies we had in the report is related with the multipolar war. The idea, this narrative about the rise of the multipolar war through mechanisms as the bridge or the SLAT, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, resonates deeply in Latin America. It aligns with values Latin American has always had about the right of our nations to have a place in the global stage, to be listening and to have some influence. So that resonates in our audiences. The issue with the multipolar war narrative is it goes from that reasonable aspiration of having a place in the global conversation and translate in anti-imperialistic, so mostly anti-US, anti-Europe feelings, and translate in against going against the Organization of the American States, going against United Nations, as portraying in this narrative as tools for imperialism and colonialism rather than international forum for exchange. The idea, that is why they focus on alternate space like the SLAT or the BRICS, so a space in which these authoritarian countries could have a more prominent presence. So that is one of the narratives we are seeing is dominant nowadays. It's one of the most common, and it was they are putting more effort, and is really got into belief and ideals people had and manipulate those beliefs and those ideals in the region. Another one we had in the case study is about sanctions for human rights violations in authoritarian countries as also tools of imperialism and foreign interference. And they manipulate the people with the idea that these sanctions hurt people, cause humanitarian crisis instead of being a tool for try to promote democratization. So that's some ones we look at.
Fabiola, would you add to the narrative question, or should I ask you something else?
I guess just on the narrative, I think one of the things that I think about is that there is a reason these false narratives and authoritarian narratives are taking root in our region, and it's in part because democracies have not been as effective, right? And we are falling trapped to polarization, ineffective governance and such. So part of the solution needs to be not only on the narrative side of things or raising visibility on how these narratives are spreading, but also in providing good examples of democratic governance, good examples of, policy and conflict resolution in a democratic and effective and transparent way. So I think it's a little bit of both. It's not only on the way the information is being spread, but also in the question that we need to, part of the question is, why are they spreading so quickly? And what can we do to address the deeper issue?
Thank you. There's another question from the audience. Is there evidence of coordination between Russia and China in these operations? Have you seen any evidence that they are collaborating actively and synchronized in a synchronized way?
Well,
the question is for any of you. So
yeah, as I mentioned, we see common narratives. We see commonalities on the discourse related with the multipolar war, related with anti-imperialism, related with the issues of sanctions as interference. So there is common narratives, and sometimes you can observe some synchronization around events like the BRICS Summit or the CELAT European Union Summit. So we see that kind of coordination, synchronization in time and common narratives. At least I haven't seen a specific coordination in a specific campaign, as say they are using the same hashtag at the same time. They are deploying the same video at the same time. I have seen that in the case, and ProBox had documented that that very, very unique coordination between Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, but haven't seen that between China and Russia. So what we see is they have common interests, common narratives, and they kind of synchronize around global events, but they use different tactics and different resources, and the way they deploy their campaigns are very, very different. We in the report we describe in detail how Russia does, how China does, how Venezuela does, so people can see what they have in common, what are the specificities of any of them.
thank you. So assume that you get a call that says, I'm the recently elected president of a Latin American country. What should I do? And I read your report and I liked it. And so I wanted you to tell me, what should I do to fortify the defenses in my country? What should I do in order to protect my people from all these kinds of intrusions and manipulations? Give me 2 or 3 examples of policies, initiatives, actions, investments, alliances that can help deal with with these attacks.
Yes, I will start to mentioning something regarding the last question, was that while Russia provides some type of knowledge, China also provides technology. So these are complementary. These are very advanced, and we don't have proof of the connection specifically through narratives, but we have seen how they complement the effort for the operation as a whole. And regarding what a new government can do, I have to say, one thing will be the regulatory frameworks, because this can be used for protecting human rights or for violating human rights. So the regulatory framework is something that has to be addressed with the, for example, using the European laws that has been created for the protection of human rights. But you have the bad examples as the Venezuelan, the Cuban, the Nicaraguan, and the Salvadorian of how laws can be created to undermine human rights. And I have to say also media literacy, even that sometimes looks even a small effort, this is necessary to do so everyone has the same knowledge and can that way we can address the problems with the same information and not having this balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Fabiola, you wanted to say something?
Actually, no, I was more curious as Mariví was speaking, what your reaction, Mariví, might be to the Brazil's framework, legal framework, as they were trying to limit some of the spread of fake news and such. And do you feel that, how would you assess that response?
And this is for?
I was just wondering for Mariví, because, as you were talking about the regulatory framework in this hypothetical new government, I'm kind of wondering if there are any good examples from the region and whether you would put Brazil in that bucket.
Absolutely. Yes, I will. They have been working for years on this regulatory framework, and I believe this could be applicable for the region, but we have to consider also the language barrier, not only between the other Latin American countries and Brazil, but also with the content moderators that doesn't have the same structure to fight against disinformation in Spanish language or Portuguese language as they do in English.
I have a question from the audience, from Veronica Carmona. She asks that the influence of Venezuela has already reached Spain, politics, and governments. Do you agree? That's the question. Any volunteer to answer?
Yeah, I can ask that. We had, there have been documented Venezuela information operations related with the secessionist movement in Catalonia in 2016. So that is kind of something we had evidence. It was a small intervention, but in a high stage situation. There is also a well-known relation between the Venezuelan government and the political party Podemos. So that is some relation. Until what point Venezuela has been affecting elections in Spain and government in Spain, I won't say that being really influential in recent years. So I think the impact of that relations with Podemos have been moderated, but other political forces in Spain and institutionally they're make harder for foreign countries to interfere. So, but it have been attempts to influence have been documented in the past.
Thank you. I have several questions from the audience concerning multilateral organizations. Say something, or what is there any relevance to that conversation to bring into the fold the notions about multilaterals? Can they play a larger role? Can they help fortify the defenses of some countries? Or that is a national security kind of thing that is left to each sovereign individually? So what do you think about the role of multilateral organization? In this case, obviously, the obvious one is the OAS, right? But you could also go crazy and argue that the IDB should be funding some of the efforts to protect the country and the projects. That would probably be hard to pull off, but, it's not crazy to imagine, right?
as you say, the Organization of American States should have a role here, and that role can be tied to the Inter-American Charter of Democracy. I think it's time, it's actually overdue to revamp the Inter-American Charter for Democracy, and within that umbrella, having more to say and more to do on countering extra-hemispheric influence operations, operations who interfere with democracy, undermine democracy in the region. I think it's a role there to follow. And going back to your previous question, there is a document, declaration from the Organization of American States, specifically regarding to the issue of fake news legislation and freedom of expression. And the doctrine is very strong about there's a dangerous path when you try to regulate what is true and what is false regarding news. So it's not something I will advocate for. I will advocate more for legislation who we help to strengthening the free independent media, public service media, rather than trying to police what is true, what is false. That is more the work of the academia, of the independent scholars, civil society to do digital literacy. But I won't put that power in the hands of any government. Government changed and they had interests.
Thank you. So the hallmark of a good conversation is that you don't want it to end, but we have arrived to, that's the time we have. You have been wonderful panelists, both because of how much you know about this and how well you frame it and explain it. So thank you very much for doing this. Again, let me invite Adam Fivenson to just close the session, and thank you also.
Well, thank you so much, Moisés. And just a quick summary of key points. We talked about closer collaboration between global powers like Russia and China, working along with regional powers like Venezuela and others to attack elections, to attack democracy through the information space. We talked about their goals, how they operate, some of their key narratives, and why they might be effective in open societies. We talked about certain advantages that authoritarians have in the information space in terms of close collaboration, less political competition for resources, and no legal blockages to their use of manipulation in the information space, but also some advantages that civil society and democratic governments have, and we document some of that in the report. And on the civil society side, we talked about opportunities to reclaim the information space for democracy by working through civil society that brings diverse skill sets together. We need the fact checkers, we need the independent journalists, we need these more traditional approaches to information integrity, but we also have to do more, as Fabiola was saying. It's not just lies that we're up against, it's information manipulation, often true information that feeds grievance, drives division, and generates demand for authoritarian governance, right? At the end of the day, that's a key part of our problem. And it's those types of attacks that, in our estimation, in our analysis, often fly under the radar and constitute what the forum calls sharp power. As the report says, a big part of what democracies and civil society have to do a better job of is highlighting and explaining sharp power, which is basically modern authoritarian influence that really uses the information space to turn people against each other and undermine democracies. So with that, I want to thank Moisés for his tremendously skilled moderation of this really important discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists for their willingness to join us and talk about their work. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be part of today's discussion. This, of course, would be nothing if there was no one to share it with. And that's really, we mean that. That's why we're here. This is the International Forum, and this is the work that we do. And so I'll just close by encouraging you to read the report. It's a slim 7,000 words across 3 reports or 3 essays. It's linked in the chat here, and it's also on the NED website. If you go to ned.org/ideas, you'll find it. And with that, please get in touch if you have questions, if you have thoughts, reactions. But we'd like to thank you again for making time to be with us today. And yeah, looking forward to more and hearing more from all of you as you have a chance to read the report. Thank you so much.